Evening, everyone. We are the Town Budget Committee meeting for our third and probably final meeting in review of the 2023 budget year. Following our last meeting last Thursday, I heard from several Budget Committee members requesting this meeting for additional discussion on the following items. A further review of certain salary lines in the administration budget, a better understanding behind the 23.61% requested increase in this year's administration budget to include a comparison of the inherited payroll versus that proposed in the 2023 administration budget. Third point was the current state of affairs regarding the town's undesignated fund. And there was also a question raised regarding if the town had an emergency fund, and if so, what its interrelation with the town's undesignated fund might be. And then a final question was raised, where is the $60,000 that was moved from the municipal capital fund? So with that, why don't we start with the administration budget? And I've invited representation from the select board tonight. I wanted to be sure that any decisions that might be made at tonight's meeting certainly weren't based on unknown or wrong information. And we can't get better information than we can from our select board. So thank you to Kevin, Joe, and Josh, sorry. Mental block there. So with that, I'll open it up. Why don't we focus on the administration budget? There's a chance for you to ask your questions.
The purpose of doing this, we voted on it twice, so we're going to vote again.
If there's a motion, we have a quorum, so if somebody wants to revisit the vote, we can.
Okay.
But some people, like I said, had questions, and since we had this meeting scheduled anyways, as is reserved date, I figured that it would make sense to make sure everyone felt good about what we discussed previously and what our votes were.
So the reason why I requested to discuss the administration budget is because when I was trying to summarize notes to pass on to the select board as to why we made our decisions and where we made our decisions, I also reviewed the inherited information that we received last Thursday night because I didn't really have a chance to process it. And there's some discrepancies, I guess, for lack of a better term, that I wanted to clarify so that I made sure I understood it when people in the town came to me with their questions. One of them is that the town manager said that his salary currently is $93,000, and it's in his contract to go up to $97,000. But then in another location, my note stated that he was under the 5% COLA raise. So I'm just curious which it is.
So the way the contract reads is he was hired at 93, and he has a 6-month probationary period, and which is essentially like a week. Last week is when 6 months was up. He'll get a review from the select board, and assuming a satisfactory outcome of that, then I think he goes. I want to say it goes to 95.5, and then the 97 is what he had in there for a budget, but the 97 is not a contractual amount. The way the contract reads is that annually on his date of anniversary, which is July 28th, he would get 3% raise or whatever percent was given to the town as a whole, like for a COLA increase, which this year is 5%. He gets whichever is greater. So if there were no COLA type increase, he would get 3%. If it's higher than 3, then he gets that amount. But he'll get that because of this contract on his anniversary date is when that will become effective. Whereas other town employees, any raise will become effective the start of the first full pay period after the budget is approved at town meeting.
Okay.
So he'd get it for 6 months out of the year for the continuing of this year. He'd be at the 95.5 plus the 5%.
Well, no.
If we
'cause
voted in.
No, because in July, he'll go very soon, he'll go to 95.5,
Correct.
and then he would get 5%, I think, on top of that in July, his anniversary date.
Right. That's what I was saying.
Okay, yeah, then yes.
That's not what the budget says. The budget says he goes 97, right?
Yeah, I think when he was, he said when he was putting together the budget, that he may have that line a little bit low, but he just said, he'll make it work within the budget, basically.
It probably evens out because when he gets his 5% raise in June, he's up to $100,275. So it was probably taking in the consideration of the lower
Maybe.
95 and then the
So
higher
his line
100.
item is probably a little bit low, but like you said, you just make it work within the budget because it had already been put out there and it wasn't worth revisiting.
Okay. And then a similar question for the code enforcer. Because he's at 55.8.
Yeah, he doesn't have a contract. He's, so I can't speak as definitively about that. All I know is that, whatever rate he was hired at, he'll be eligible for the 5% increase, just like the other employees.
So is it typical for people to get COLA raises when they haven't been here a year? Because
Yeah,
there's several
I would
positions
say
in
it
this.
is.
Okay.
So I know we had a lot of discussion last year around the raise pool and COLA, and my concern with the way that this is presented and that is that it's really embedded. And so if like last year when we did it for the raise pool, the select board had recommended a number and the budget committee had recommended a number. And where I'm having a hard time reconciling this is that, almost 32% towards wages. And I understand like with the labor market and I get all of that stuff, but if it makes it really difficult to separate out whether or not we want to approve a 3% or 4%. I didn't like it last year either. I don't know what the
I would
solution
say
to
that
this problem
the
is.
budget committee is not asked to offer an opinion on whether it should be 3%.
No, but we're going to arrive at a number. And if
Right.
the number that we want to arrive at is the 3%, then what I'm saying is that if it's like a contractual thing that he's going to get the 3%, the number, doing it this way, everyone across the board is at a 5% number. And so if we're looking at the people who are employed for less than a year, and we feel like they just got this, or people have already gotten a raise this year, and so the 5%, we're not comfortable with arriving at that total number at the bottom, it makes it really difficult to do that this way. And so the way that the budget has gone from where it was and approved in 2022, because they can spend the money however they want to within the article, we have now assumed these reoccurring fee or, expenses that really are not what the voters approved. And I don't know how to fix that situation. I'm having a hard time with it because it's such a discrepancy.
I guess I'll speak first. Granted, it is tough to follow the way the format is now. And I know that Jerry, next year, his plan is to, if he follows through with what he's expressed to me he's going to do, you won't see separate lines for each position within administration. You're going to see wages and you're going to see benefits, and you'll be able to see on one line the percent increase or whatever of wages for that year. So then it's clearer to see you know, what is the upward or change in
Right,
rate?
it'd be more like a real pool at that. point.
Yeah,
Is what
and
you're
so the
depending on
pool,
doing.
the pool idea was, it makes it very complex to enter in Trio because you're approving funds in one article and then you're trying to allocate them to several other articles for pay increases. What was the second part of your?
Well, I think what my issue is that because there isn't budgetary constraints among the line, right?
Right,
The level of accountability in terms of how a now reoccurring cost has been allocated to this budget feels, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for. I apologize that I'm not being articulate
No,
about
that's
this.
fine.
It's,
We still only have one tool to deal with this as a budget committee.
I know,
And that-
I'm,
Know what that tool is?
right, I know our
To
voice to
say
vote.
yes or no,
Right.
which is why I said no.
Well, to give them less money.
Right,
right, that's your
Right.
lever.
it's just, but let's give, if we give them less money, I'm just saying, like, we give them less money, but then all of these raises still go into effect the way that they are presented to us here. Now, next year when we go into, and I get it, they're gonna have to reduce other lines and, you know, that type of thing, but it is another jump of reoccurring costs
Well, the
that
town,
is
the town can
really,
say no to this.
Yeah.
The town can make it so confiscatory that they can't do the raises they want to do. And everything else. That's up to the town. If the town doesn't want to give people a 5% raise, they can say no.
Yeah.
And make that known. And if the town manager can figure out a way to give them the 5% raise and still come within the budget, then, okay,
And,
that's
yeah,
his,
even
that's his deal.
though the town manager isn't necessarily bound by an expression of where a cut should come from, whether that comes from the budget committee or town floor, it's generally wise for them to consider that when they're making
right.
their
And so
decisions.
I want to believe in good faith that the reason why we're seeing this, you know, type of increase, and I understand we hired new people that have, you know, higher skill sets, and I'm not disputing, I know the labor market is crazy, like, I understand.
Yeah.
And I want to believe in good faith that this is because we had the town manager, we had the interim town manager, they were trying to, you know, level the playing field. But to me, looking at this, you know, just the change from 2022 to year end at 31% when we're talking about wages, that feels like the opposite of that.
I'm not sure I followed what feels the opposite of what.
Like how you're saying it like behoove the town manager
I
to
see.
go along with that, right? I'm not putting this on him.
No,
This
I
happened
see what you're
before
saying.
he got here,
I
right?
think if if you're making an apples to apples comparison, I would agree with you. But I think if you look at, you know, what changed from the point in time that the 22 budget was approved to when Jerry walked through the door. Like, so for instance, if you look at the spreadsheet on the document that I gave you,
I know.
it's yeah, sorry, I printed a little small. Most of the difference happened because of things that happened before Jerry got here, and I understand you acknowledge that. But it's and you've already acknowledged that, you know, yeah, there was market forces in play and whatever, and it's kind of like that's the reality of what happened and where we are. And so where we are now against where the 22 budget started, admittedly, that's a big delta, much, much higher than normal. You know, you know, definitely consider that an anomaly. It's true every year that the wages you're paying a person when you annualize it to the next year is almost always higher than what you started with at the beginning of the previous budget year, right? Because things happen over the course of the year. But the number and magnitude of changes this year was very unusual in terms of, you know, the higher rate for a town manager, the higher rate for the code enforcement officer, and the addition of a part-time position that was a zero in the 22 budget, but was brought on because there was a need for it this year. And so now that goes from a 0 in the 22 baseline to what now, this is the part that the town manager is proposing, that it's on him to take that from part-time to full-time. So you're going from a 0 to a full-time
Plus
position,
benefits.
so plus benefits. So that's, that's a big delta versus LY, and that's a big chunk of the, the 31% or whatever the number is.
Well, technically, he's responsible for half of that because you guys created the part-time position, or the previous town managers did the part-time position, right? And he's proposing to go from
That's what I'm
part-time to
saying,
full-time.
that's what I'm saying, that's on
So,
him.
right,
That
but
part's on him.
half of it's on
Right.
him.
Yeah,
The
that's what I
other-
meant, the difference is.
Yeah.
Can I ask a crazy question? So Jerry, when he first came in, said, I want to fill the position, not the person. So the spiel was that we would give everybody at least the single coverage, correct, of insurance, not give it to them, but we'd have that in the budget, just in case that person left, we need a new person, we'd bump it up, or we'd have it. So then it got changed to everyone is what their actuals are, but the new position
The open
or
position.
the open position is now a family plan. So in my, I'm trying to say this diplomatically. So Jerry is a very smart man. I will give him that. He knows how to be able to get funds available to him. And I can't, look down on him for that. But to me, to put that $24,000 in, is there a way that we could lower it to the single plan and have a contingency, not in this line, but I mean, if we didn't have it and they had to come to the select board, would it be a special meeting? Or do we have funds available? I just don't want him to get tied up in here unnecessarily so that, hey, I made it to the bottom line.
But
Do you know what I'm
We
saying?
took a,
we still have the same tool, only have one tool, Jane.
Mhm.
Don't give it to them.
No, what
That's-
she's asking.
I know what she's
is-
asking.
Is, does it require a special town meeting to increase the amount? Or is there a way that we can
Correct.
find funding like through the emergency fund or?
So, okay, so the answer, there's several kind of questions embedded in there. So if,
Very diplomatically.
yeah, we can't overspend an article. Well,
Okay.
we can because we have, right? So, but that's where things, kick in when you have to fix the, so you first try to answer your question. If you didn't budget for family and somebody came on and required family,
What would you do?
what would you do? So your first option is, can I make this work within the total of the article that I have? And if the answer to that is no, like if the budget is so tight that you literally don't have that. and
Right, you may not be able to.
Right, and you knew you were going to, then in order to get more money to spend in that article, that would require a special town meeting. And the only funding source available would be undesignated because we can't issue more than one tax assessment in a year. We can collect more than once a year, like we can split the collection up multiple times, which we may see in future years, but you can only do a tax assessment once a year. So,
Why can't you use the emergency fund?
so the next one would be, you could use an emergency fund, and there is an emergency fund, I can't remember off the top of my head how much is in it.
16.
Okay. Expending from the emergency fund doesn't require a special town meeting, but it requires an approval by the select board and approval by the budget.
Is that an ordinance or a policy?
I believe that's an ordinance.
We voted on it
That
We did vote
predates
on it.
me on
at that one.
on when that
predates them.
that's been in place for a while, and I know there was a few years back, we tried to put a contingency fund article on the warrant, which basically, and I won't get the wording exactly right, but it basically, I think it was like $10,000 or $15,000 or something, that it allowed the selectmen, like, if we did get caught short somewhere, or if we had something come up, like, I don't know if you guys are aware, but we have pipes burst over at the Eureka Center. we just found out about today. So that's the type of thing that, that comes up or whatever else. So, in the process of researching that contingency, Ruth researched the emergency fund and that's where she, reported out on what the procedure was for using the emergency fund.
So Jane, one of my questions was in my little handout that you guys got was, what is the emergency fund policy? Because I was thinking we could use it for things like that.
Right.
So if we want to reduce
So you
this,
could take that
reduce
out.
the emergency fund a little bit
Mhm.
and use, if we can, and use it for situations like that. You don't want to give it to them this year? Just, I kind of would agree with that probably.
Well, it just gets it out of that line of
Yeah.
being mixed up and still making your bottom budget.
But there is one more option though.
Okay.
So the other
I'm
option
open.
is that what Jerry's idea of his contingency fund was so that he didn't have to come to both committees to get permission to go and put somebody on a family plan versus a single plan. And that $15,000 that was voted down was for that purpose, which is why he was trying to get into a mode where he's the town manager now. He's gonna make the decisions on all the hiring and letting go or whatever else that goes on. And so it doesn't become a burden that has to come back to a vote. There's just some things that shouldn't, like putting somebody on a family plan shouldn't be something that requires a town vote, quite frankly.
And
But
it
I
gets to-
think-
Sorry, I want to piggyback. It gets to the philosophy of a budget, right? And what is a budget? So, I mean, several of you heard me say over the years that a budget is not a list of known expenses, okay? A budget is, you need to plan for what you can reasonably expect you might need to pay for.
Mhm.
And it's not unreasonable to budget for an open position that you don't know who's gonna take it,
Mhm.
that you should be ready to, and have funds available in that article for a family plan if that person needs it. Now, if they don't, the next year, you don't budget those funds and the unexpended funds rolls back into undesignated.
So, gosh, I just lost my train of thought. But I believe when we voted that $15,000 out, the 24,000 was in there. Is that
Yes.
correct?
I think that's true.
So he had the 24 and an extra 15.
Yeah, because I think he was what was going on there is like, if you think back to when he originally proposed the budget,
Mhm.
he had that family on everybody, even people that
No,
were.
he had 11. He had a single on everybody.
No, I don't
No,
think so.
it's
Not his
not
very
family.
first one. I think he had family. But anyway, so after that, he and I had a conversation after that one. I said,
Mhm.
maybe that's a lot of cushion.
Right.
So he
Right.
said maybe we so then we landed on, let's put everybody in the budget and what they're actually at, if it's a known.
Mhm.
If you have an open position, budget it as family so that you can cover that if you need it. And then that 15 is contingency if something else changes. Like for instance,
Right,
if
so
one of
someone
the
leaves a
knowns
single, yeah.
changes, like
Right.
divorce, marriage, spouse loses a job, whatever. Or it could be used for, it doesn't have to be insurance, could be anything in the article.
Mhm.
It might be that, professional services or whatever, I don't know, but that's why it's called contingency, because you don't know.
But I think we're going from having no town manager to have a town manager that cost us big bucks that did not accomplish half of what Jerry is accomplishing now. Okay, I will give him that. I'm not, but I mean, I felt very bad when he said we don't trust him. It's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of we're treading in new water here. And from what was done in the past, it's kind of scary to give someone that leeway to have those
Yep,
funds.
I understand that,
You know?
but I guess I would ask that, considering, honestly, I think he's done such a good job. It's tough to remember that he's only been here 6 months.
Mhm.
And that honestly, I think in year one, I think he's still trying to figure out the best path for everything, right?
Mhm.
He's trying to figure out how to best use, the employees he has in the office and what roles they play and how can he do that most efficiently. And he's, there's gonna be some stumbling and figuring it out and, oh, that didn't work, let's try this. So I guess I would ask to consider maybe giving him a little bit more slack than you might otherwise do once he's been here, 2, 3, 4 years. In year one, I think if he's got resources there that he might need to tap into, it would be great for a new town manager to have those resources rather than overly constrain him.
Okay, but we still have to face the townspeople. And that's like a 36%
Right,
increase.
and I get that, Jane, but I guess I would also ask people to step back and look at the big picture and the budget as a whole. We're looking at a budget that it's very likely we are not gonna have to raise the mill rate. We're gonna come in a flat mill rate, or up very, very slightly. Depends on how county comes in, but if you look at the estimated impact on the sheet, this is not a big tax increase year. There is room to keep taxes about where they are, if not absolutely flat, and provide him with a little bit of slack there.
Okay, so help me to understand though, because, I'm sorry, Jill.
You're fine.
Because this is the year, when does that senior citizen 65 lock in place?
Next year. Well, this is the year that locks them in.
2023.
Next year is when the freeze starts.
Okay, so are we under the assumption that they will be locked in, any increase will be divided among us remaining?
No, that's not the way it
No?
works. The
Okay,
state
thank you.
The state picks up the tab.
The state pays it's similar to homestead exemption, right?
Okay.
It's
So they'll have it deducted right on their thing, they'll see what they're getting as
I
a,
don't know what it looks like, to be honest with you.
okay, I just want to make sure it doesn't lay on
But
all of
Neil
us.
is right, the idea of like the homestead exemption, it's the state, then you can complain to your legislature about your state taxes going up.
I think Kevin made a comment in a select board meeting that, I think probably more out of sarcasm, that if we don't get paid by the state, then that loss of tax income from the seniors has to come from somewhere in the town.
Yeah, the state
Because-
will pay
What I
it,
heard.
yeah.
Because nothing is clear cut from the state of where it's coming from and things like that quite yet. They announced the big announcement but they haven't
Because we're going for votes.
haven't obviously done, or at least publicly made clear the
Okay.
background.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in hindsight are seeing some flaws in that legislation, so I wouldn't be surprised if you see some tweaks to that this year.
Okay, I said my piece. I tried to be diplomatic.
I think you did great, Jake.
This question was asked, and again, with me trying to take my notes, I couldn't remember what the answer was. And I do believe, unfortunately, it was a question to the town manager, so I can email him before town meeting if you guys don't know the answer or recall the answer. Again, just looking at things as a position, not thinking about the people. I'm kind of curious. It seems to me like it would make more sense to have 2 part-time people as opposed to making a part-time person full-time, because then, especially if we end up with one of those full-time equivalents being the contracted out position, because it gives you more benefit of coverage for vacation and sick time, along with, granted, the benefit of not, or the pay savings of not paying benefits might get lost because the wages that you're having to pay, and you now have like 2 20-hour people versus 1 36-hour person. But I don't remember what the answer was, why we felt that wouldn't be a benefit to the
Yeah,
town.
I don't know. I don't recall the answer either.
Okay,
But I guess I
I'll
would go
email
back
them and
to,
ask them.
it's up to the town manager to figure out the best staffing model based upon the staff he already has and what they're able to do and where he has gaps. So whether it's 2 part-timers or a full-timer, that's really up to him. At the end of the day, he has to live within whatever budget he has and figure out how to make it work. Right.
I just know last year it was the argument of we need to have a part-time person because 2 full-time people in the office doesn't cover vacation and sick times. And if we do contract out payroll, it kind of recreates that position and does ask the question of what happens then next year.
Yeah, I think, yeah, go ahead. Joe.
You know, I mean, you know, this is kind of why I did that Manning plan, you know, based on what Jerry was thinking with the folks, that he had on staff and the potential for bringing a full-time person in. So, you know, we went through the list of things that everybody actually does. And which is where I came up with a number that came up to almost 4.5 people to do the work that's both behind the counter, including what the IT folks do for the town. So I left that out last time by mistake, but it included the IT employees as well.
In the
when-
4.5.
In the 4.5. So what his idea was is to go into this with 3.5, not go for the 4.5 people. Because I based it on a 40-hour work week, as I said, it came up to like, I want to say it was, I'm looking for the email here, it was around 8,800 hours, or a little bit over 8,800 hours of work in a year on a 40-hour work week. And it was just figuring in a few, you know, basic weekends, and I think I threw the holidays in there. So when you back that down to 36 hours, which is I think what the employees are working maximum, and so you end up with 4 extra hours that you're not accounting for. That's kind of what drove that number up to 4, you know, the 4.5 there. It was like right in that range. So when he looked at the manning, his idea of how to do the manning, pulling the IT folks in, helping with the behind the counter work as the part-time people to fill in for those times when vacation came or breaks or whatever. Because he said what's happening now, and even without comparing it to another town with the number of people they have for the same amount of counter time, he said they're at the window the entire time during the time they're sitting in this office. On most days, there's very little downtime. So the other stuff, like doing elections and doing the various, you know, meeting minutes and keeping track of everything else, it doesn't get done within the window of time needed. So, you know, he has to sometimes send people home, say, you got to go. I can't pay you any more overtime. That's going to put me over the budget, right? So he's trying to get to a happy medium. Now, if he outsources the treasurer's position, that does help greatly. I think that's a really good thing for the town. It's going to get all our numbers straightened out. Whether that stays out there or not, that's something that can be decided in a couple of years by him, or whether he wants to pull that back in when we reconcile the accounts. He may not need as much, but he's still, even taking that position out and outsourcing it. I just said I was at 4.5 people. You're still at 3.5 people to do the work that's still here. So so he's still doing more with less with 3.5 people that he's budgeting for. And I'm thinking it's a pretty good plan. I'm not seeing that there's a huge flaw in the way that a manning, I mean, you don't want to be overmanned. Nobody ever wants to be overmanned, because then you have people sitting around. You don't want that.
Less productive.
So just the amount of work that just them rattling off for 2 hours while I was sitting here going through the plan, it came up to that amount. I mean, you'd be surprised at how long it takes them to do absentee voting. But absentee voting can take,
That's
you
a
know,
huge
it's a
time suck.
huge, I mean, they have to do it by law, and it's only one person that really can go do that at this point. So, you know, that person's then down for the day if you have voting going on. They're just vacant for those 2-3 weeks that all of that stuff is coming in. And same with setting up for a town meeting. That's a huge, you know, that's 3 weeks of time. It might be spread out across days, but it's a lot of time when you start adding up how many hours people are really here. So there was some big heavy tickers in the spring and then in the fall for the 2 voting periods without anything else special going on. And then, you know, so what do you do with all the people that are standing at the counter during that time frame? So I think he's got a pretty good plan. I don't think there's anything that stuck out that, you know, was gregarious. I didn't think that was excessive. It looked spot on. It was a really good view of the world, keeping the employees we had doing that, bringing in the one new person to fulfill that spot. whether it be part-time or the full-time gig for the treasurer. I think it's a pretty good outlook on how we move forward.
But he's not bringing in a new body.
He might,
Yeah,
It depends on what,
I mean, if he contracts out, he's not bringing in a new body. His plan is to expand the current
that's right.
that's right.
people that he has to
That's
full-time.
Exactly.
Well,
And,
and use Kimberly and Devon.
right.
I didn't realize he was planning on using them for vacation coverage. I thought they were just
He was
lunch
gonna
coverage.
get everybody trained up across the board for all the positions. Of course, IT's a little harder, but and then that would satisfy the need for coverage.
The other question that I asked last week, so I guess I'm putting this on Josh and Kevin because you're the two new faces. We have ARPA covering a big part of our bill this year. I mean, without ARPA, we'd be at the levy limit or pretty darn close to it. Does anyone have the accounting knowledge and ability to know what is going to happen next year? Because the one thing I definitely want to make sure we're not doing this year is almost like what we did in the middle of the budget last year, is setting ourselves up for a huge increase or a surprisingly large increase next year.
So,
Do you wanna,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead, either one of you.
Yeah,
You go ahead if you.
I know.
While they're arguing over it, would you have any?
Go
Because I asked last week and you two didn't have an answer last week. Did you think of one since then?
Yeah.
Would we just not vote in as much? I mean, the ARPA stuff bought things that if we don't have the money next year, I'm not necessarily going to vote to buy a new plow truck or a new pickup truck. We bought things with ARPA because we had ARPA.
And I understand that, but I want to make sure we're not setting ourselves up that our operating budget is so large that we can't have CIP.
So CIP committee recommended the ratings of the projects, and then of course the selectmen turned around and said, okay, this is ARPA, this can't be ARPA, this is ARPA. So we went down the list. And so the schedule for Public Works and the fire department shows a schedule of what equipment's coming up over the next 5 and 10 years. I think somebody asked the chief, you don't want any more money? Extra money, right? I mean, he didn't put in an upper of any kind for additional equipment because I'm all right for now, because he's got enough in reserves. He's looking at a plan 5 and 10 years out that says, well, next year I will ask for some money. Public Works, he asked for what, $100,000. I think we cut it down to 50, but does have trucks coming up. So I look at it as, well, you can pay me now or pay me later. So will there be a big upper next year? There could be if there's a truck coming up in the following year. So instead of putting $100,000 this year and $100,000 next, you might be putting $150,000 next year. and
That wouldn't
50,000
affect-
next
Okay, I
That
don't
wouldn't
think you're
affect the
understanding
act-
my base question
Well,
though.
So can I take a stab at it?
Sure.
So I think, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, like if we had the same amount of capital expenditures next year without the ARPA funds to cover them, are we setting ourselves up for a big tax increase? And I guess I would leverage what John said. Well, if all things were equal and we spent the same amount of money without ARPA, then yeah, that would be a tax increase. But there are some things working in our favor there. One, we do have to John's point, we review it every year. We see, okay, how far down the list from the CIP committee, can we go? And you prioritize just like you always do. It's also starting next year, as you know, we have several bonds with roads and public works. Starting next year, those start coming off the schedule. So I think next year it's $100
93.
and something $1,000.
160.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, 160, yeah. So that's money that is currently being raised, that does not have to go to a bond payment next year,
Mhm.
that could be applied to one-off as capital expenses with no tax impact to the town. So
No
it's-
tax
So let me
increase.
reword it a little differently then. It's been spoken by the public, some sarcastically, some pleading, some just frankly stating it, that they really hope that when the bonds payments start falling off, we just don't see that as an opportunity to spend that money someplace else.
Well, I think the board will have to
And-
look at, what is because, I think people like to say like, the board spends money, the board spends money. But the board does not spend a dime. All the money, the only money that gets spent is what's approved by voters. So if voters approve a certain budget and a certain amount of capital expenditures, then we have to raise the funds to pay for that. Otherwise, they shouldn't vote for it.
But
There are certain things the town needs to operate. You don't take care of the roads, eventually you're gonna need to spend more to fix them.
I understand all of that. I understand all of that. What I'm asking, what I'm trying to ask is, has our, try wording it this way maybe, has our operating budget grown so much in the past 2 years that what we have come to traditionally spend on capital reserves and capital improvements is either going to have to be fractionalized, or the town people is going to see, a big tax increase? And I don't want to say nickel and dime, but let's face it, right? We're all kind of used to in this town about a 3 to 5% increase in our taxes annually for the past few
We
years.
have not had an increase in 3 years.
Excuse me, my bill went up.
My bill went up.
Your bill went up, it was because of an assessment change. The mill rate has been at 20, if it stays flat again, this will.
We
be
haven't
a good
had
year.
any
We
market
haven't had an
assessments.
assessment.
No, but it can be an individual's assessment can change.
How
Because
does
like
that
if you,
happen?
well, if you do an addition or if you do,
I haven't
So,
done diddly
I'm telling you, the mill rate has been 2070 for the past 2 years and is likely to stay that or very close to it again.
But the total evaluation of the town's gone up, so taxes have been raised.
Total tax revenue, yes, but because of the valuation increase and there's more property in town, but the mill rate has not changed.
Raise
So-
your hand if your taxes have gone up.
It was
I'm telling you,
minimal.
the mill rate, go look at your tax bill. The mill rate has been 2070.
Mine went down last year, because I know, because the mortgage company.
Lucky you.
See what happens when you get on the select board? Your taxes go down. I'm just joking. I'm just joking, people. It's a joke.
I can't speak to, because a mill rate is only half of the equation on whether somebody's taxes change. Valuation is the other half. So the mill rate has been constant, and the mill rate is what the town uses to assess taxes. If something happened, that for some reason changed your assessment in the tax books, then yeah, your tax bill would have gone up. But the rate, I think I can explain this. Part of what's going on is that because our valuations are out of sync, that we're not getting the full homestead exemption that we used to get. So our homestead exemption has been going down the last couple of years. But so that could result in that's another way, should result in should be a fairly minor increase. But the mill rate itself, what the town uses to assess, has not gone up.
The way I understood your question, you were asking if the purchases we made using ARPA funds were going to result in increase. Okay, so I misunderstood your question.
Yeah, I
I think you
obviously
say,
am.
I think
This is why I'm not a public speaker, because what's up here can't come out here.
I understand.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying, are we growing the operational side so much that there's not going to be enough left to invest in capital stuff? I think that's what
Right,
you're
without
saying.
having a big tax
I
impact.
think the answer to that is no. It's not like we've been living off ARPA funds for multiple years. But I think as bonds start to drop off, we also have a lot of constraint by the budget committee and the select board over the past several years to not overuse undesignated funds. But now that is in a very healthy position, so we'll be able to use a bigger chunk of that on an annual basis going forward. So those things alone will help offset the ARPA that we don't have next year.
Right, Although with the undesignated fund, we got to figure out $500,000 to see just how healthy it really is.
So can I just chime in on, just articulate this a little bit more? I think like what she's trying to ask, if we're looking at the administration budget last year versus this year, we're around $100,000 difference. You add all of those things up, the difference between last year and this year is 250,000. And around that number is what we're proposing to spend through ARPA funds. Around that number is typically what we spend towards capital reserve, either requests or funding accounts. And so if these proposed $243,000 over last year's budget is now reoccurring, like the salary situation that I was talking about, now we're in a situation where our ARPA funds are gone. We have this increase in this operating budget that's around that same amount, and we still have to be capital improving and funding those account balances. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, because I don't see the COLA going down. And me personally, like I stated the other day, I don't understand, if Mark makes 100,000 and I make 20,000, why he gets more money to buy eggs. It doesn't make any sense to me. But that's a government thing. That's not a town thing. So I understand, we don't have any control of it being a percent or not. But if we're going to get into the habit, which has kind of been the habit of these past 2 years of, looking at 5% plus increases in wages every year and trying to then also do CIP stuff, I'm concerned that we're going to see our taxes go up next year.
Well, go ahead, Josh.
I would just say, the lawyer in me would say the answer to that is who knows? You don't know. And I don't think it's fair to give an answer personally, because, things went up, but, there's a hope the cost of gasoline and something might go down, right? So there's an increase in some places where you would expect a decrease next year or hope for a decrease. And what the expenditures next year, what needs to be done, I don't know what the 5 or 10 year plan calls for in expenses next year.
Yeah, I don't know what it is next year either, but
I think this is part of us trying to be responsible about, we always say like we're constantly flying by the seat of our pants, and we're trying to be responsible about looking out over the horizon that you say all the time, and making sure that we're not setting up the taxpayers in the town for that burden in the operating budget to now either impact the capital, or we have to now be raising that to cover it.
Right. So I guess I would say that the one thing I can say with confidence is that at some point in the future, taxes are going up, right? Because that is what we try to do is keep any increases as low as possible, and also have changes. We look to find a steady state so that we don't get big spikes and big troughs.
Which
that's where reserves comes
article,
in.
Neil.
And I think Joe can speak to this better than I, but I think we talked about one of the first budget committee meetings, like one of the to-dos or kind of next steps for the CIP committee is they're going to look at just what you're talking about. Is to not just look at what's on the schedule for the next 5 years, but what's the spending/saving plan for that? So like, what do we anticipate, looking forward, what do we anticipate, should be in reserves, or what portion of that, if any, would be raised, and what portion of it, like Jerry has floated the idea when it comes time to buy the next plow truck or whatever, that we should really look at a lease situation versus at a purchase. Another factor is, right now it's a little bit more expensive to borrow money, but interest rates are a factor too. Like what we were experiencing the last several years, the last few trucks we bought, is like money was so cheap. You were actually better off with the bond and paying 1.5–2% on a bond than grabbing reserve money from people and sticking it in an account somewhere and then spending it, 3-4 years down the road. So it's a very complex thing, but I think there's a lot of people looking at it that share the same concern that we need to plan for the needs of the town, capital plans, long-term, in a responsible way that has minimal impact to taxpayers. But I think if the expectation is zero impact, that's just not realistic.
No, I don't think but to go from 0 this year and then 10% next year.
Yeah, I don't see anything even remotely. The only time I think somebody's gonna potentially see a big increase like that is as the result of a revaluation. And if that's coming at some point in the next few years, but it shouldn't be as a result unless the town, and the only time the town has seen that in the past is when the town has voted to take on significant amounts of bond debt. Like when we, with the public works stuff and some of the road stuff, and then with those situations, all you can do is say, you put it before the town and say, this is what we think needs to be done, and this is how much it's gonna cost. And like, to Neil's point, they either approve it or they don't. We don't spend the money, we ask the question of the citizens, and they're the ones at town meeting that say yes or no on spending the money.
And I will say that the department heads and Jerry have been working on that spreadsheet based on the input from the CIP. I mean, that's what CIP is looking for. Is, what do you expect moving forward? And they've set up their spreadsheet, which I believe got handed out to everybody at one point, that shows where some of the funds are going to be applied this year, and then what might be raised for what equipment as it goes out through 2027. So they do have a plan and a proposed way to either raise the money and they say raise because that's all they know, right? They know they're not going to have the money, so they're proposing whatever $100,000 this year for a truck later on in 2 years. So I mean that's a plan, and whether we fund it at 50 or 60 or the amount they asked for. Eventually, you're going to get to a bottom line that you need that truck, rent, own, whatever the case may be, and then raise or find some other means to fund it when that time comes.
There's a couple things that are going to be different next year. We won't have the stream crossing money. That's 50 grand. And most of those ARPA funds were one-time deals, really. They're going to add some overhead and maintenance, but.
Right, I know they're not adding recurring expenses for the most part, so.
The one thing that's going to be negative for us next year is the undesignated fund money we're using this year is significantly more than we did last year.
Yeah.
We used 75 grand last year from an undesignated fund to offset taxes. This year we're using 230.
230-ish.
250.
No, more than that.
I would
We're
say,
saying 250, they're saying 230.
and-
Well, plus the fire department over.
yeah,
that
that doesn't,
Yeah,
that's real money, but it's not part of that whatever. It's not part of the 23 budget. It's considered part of the 22 budget. So it's the undesignated funds that you're deciding to put towards the 23 budget does not include the overages for solid waste and fire department in 2022. Those
But
are
it would
just-
have to
but you
get
add it all
subtracted from
together
the 137.
Yeah. 137.
The unspent that went in, the unspent.
Well, it'll come out of undesignated, so yeah, the net effect is that, yes, because
So it's a total of 252,984.
For the budget.
230, the 200 plus the 30 we added for the solid waste and
Yeah.
public works, and then you had the 14,344 for the solid waste that went over,
Yep.
and the 8,638 for
right,
the over the fire department. So we're gonna draw out of
That's
undesignated
right.
funds a total of 252.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's,
But in terms of applied to the 23 budget,
It's
It's-
the 230.
it's the two.
It's a 230, okay.
It's
It's still coming out of the fund, but some of it's being applied to last year's budget, and the majority is being applied to this year's budget. But we are lowering.
my point was
Some.
we won't have as much money next year. Likely won't have as much money next year to use from undesignated as we do this year.
Correct.
Right.
Right. And so then people brought up the bond, but the bond, so like 160, but when we're looking at the increase for this year in the operating budget, it's 243. So I feel nervous about our number, and we can talk about things a little bit more, but I definitely be, if nobody else is making a motion to revisit that number, I feel like our number's too high. I had a
I
couple.
think, so one thing I want to add there, Heather, is that when you have to go another step, I think, when you just look at the operating budget, you also need to look at the increase in revenues that came in from the state, so not that entire increase in operating budget is being paid for by raised taxes. There's a portion of it. So I think if you want to look at, the year-to-year tax impact, you should really look at the municipal assessment number, and you could back out undesignated or whatever if you wanted, and you could get an idea of, what's the impact of the revenues. But the bigger concern, I think, and the bigger potential for an increase on the municipal assessment side is if the economy tanks and state revenue drops, then we don't have nearly as much revenue coming in against that. And then you need to start looking at, okay, you might need to start actually cutting some stuff if the increase to offset the loss of revenue would be too much. So,
The revenues tab, Kevin, in your budget impact spreadsheet,
yeah.
I didn't look at all of these numbers, but you have estimated 2023 column. And that number you have for auto excise, for example, is actually last year's auto
Yeah,
excise.
in that case, it's last year's and that's being applied.
So is that true for the state revenue sharing as well?
No, state revenue sharing is an estimate. So what the state does is that and the last estimate was like last March for 23. So they give you an estimated number, like based upon what's going on in the economy, because it's a percentage of sales tax revenues is what state revenue sharing is.
Wow.
And so like last year, our actual came in a bit higher than what they had told us the estimate was. This year, the estimate that we've gotten from the state so far is for a slight decrease versus what we got last year.
200 grand, that's not.
So I think if you look at the, if you hover over the comment there, and this is something, Jerry wanted to do, that is 80% of the current state estimate, and in talking to a lot of other town managers, because it's oftentimes the case that you don't get from the state what they say you're going to get for planning purposes in terms of revenue. You count 80% of it instead of 100% of it, and then if it comes in 100%, great.
Right.
But I will say, for the purposes of calculating the levy limit, we did use 100% because we wanted to be, to take as much credit of that as possible and not overly inflate what the limit would be. So in that, we did use 100%.
Any couple more questions regarding the administration?
I have a couple of questions. So and I don't know if you'll know the answer to this or not. Are there different versions of Trio in terms of what the program offers?
I don't know the answer.
There's two versions of Trio. One of them is local client server and one of them is cloud-based.
Okay. So,
We use local client server.
okay, I'd be interested to know, do you know the cost difference between the two?
We have the cheapest one.
Okay, so you know how I love to research and compare. The town of Monmouth's 2023-2024 budget info is on their website, and they pay $13,000 for Trio. So I'm trying to figure out what
Who?
the town of Monmouth. Their number for Trio is $13,000. So I didn't know if we had a better version or that.
What's our number?
21.
They may charge for more local clients. I don't know.
I don't know anything about their fee structure. You'd have to
I
ask,
don't remember.
Jerry would have to look into that.
I think Jerry said they did have a user license and that was part of the reason why it was going up was because he was adding another user. So
So the clients are users, so they probably have a user fee, a client fee.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of those things that it would, you know what I mean? I want to find that out going forward. That's a big chunk. The other thing that I noticed, if we are going to revisit the administration budget, is that in 2022, we had a federal election. And so we have budgeted $7,500 in that line, and we don't have a federal election this year. And so when I go back historically, we typically do around $3,500 to $3,700. And I know, people are like $3,000 looking over the budget, but if we're like adding all of these things from all of these, areas up,
I got 2250.
no, the payroll.
Oh, payroll 7,500. I
Yeah.
see.
And so in other like years that are not federal election years, it's typically around 3,500 to 3,700. So just putting that out there.
I like that.
And then this is for the budget committee that it's not about administration. So do you want me to wait? No?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. So that's what I have for administration.
I guess we should ask the question, does anybody want to revisit the administration vote?
No. We voted on it twice.
it has to be done by a motion.
All right, I make a motion to ask the budget committee if they want to revisit the administrative budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
So it's been moved by Jill and seconded by Heather that we revisit the vote made regarding the administration
That
budget.
really wasn't the motion. The motion was to see if we wanted to do it.
Right,
Take a poll.
yeah, it's a
On
poll.
people that are interested in discussing the reasons why further. I mean, if there are people that don't have any interest in revisiting, then
Then I'll just be a person. on the
Technically, a
floor.
motion to reconsider is
Okay.
what you're doing.
Right.
And I don't know for sure, and I don't know if it really applies. I think you can set your own rules you live by, but I think at town meeting, a motion to reconsider would need a 2/3 vote
To reconsider it.
to reconsider, if it's
And I'm
something.
fine with
I
that.
don't think,
I'm fine with
I
saying
don't
we
think
need
that
2/3
necessarily
vote.
applies to a budget committee. I don't know, but
I thought as long as they had a quorum. So do you want me to do this as a motion or you just want to have a discussion?
No, I guess, because there's no point in beating a dead horse. Leave it in the closet, it can come out on town floor.
Okay.
It'll take you longer on town floor.
right. So that's the thing is that like Jerry, said at the beginning that he doesn't want, he knows that there's going to be questions and he knows that there's going to be, people that are not part of this process are going to have questions that they'd like to have answered. The back and forth, he would like to see that hashed out here. I feel like as our evening progressed, there were things that impacted early decisions in the meeting that came later, right? And I fully admit that when we talked about undesignated funds and you rightfully said, you were all given this information, that was an oversight on my part. And I would have definitely voted differently had you brought, had you said that ahead of the vote. That's me, that's on me, that's not on you. And that then in turn impacts what I would have voted or brought up for discussion about previous articles.
And so what you mentioned right now, that makes a good point because if we don't address the 7,500 that's currently in the budget, that will become a permanent figure.
Okay.
If we're able to go back historically and show that on years that there are no federal elections, the amount needed was 35, 37, whatever the amount is, then it might continue in that trend. But if now we have successive years, both a year last year in which it was a federal election, and then we have a year where there's not a federal election, and that amount stays the same. What's probably going to happen is the 7,500 amount will go up. It may be proposed a higher amount the next time we do have a federal.
So
So-
I realize I'm being my own devil's advocate, but we could also say that maybe we got the ear of the select board and they'll make that change. But the only problem there is then we're not going to town meeting with the same numbers. We're
Right.
going to town meeting.
And
with
we
different
might
numbers for
still-
different reasons.
We might still not go with the
Mhm.
same number,
Right.
but I feel one of the things that resonated with me a lot out of town meeting last year was when a resident stood up and said, it's not appropriate. Whether or not this is true or not, there was someone there who felt this way, that when we were getting up to speak as residents, because when I'm here, I don't consider my point of view it's not just me. I'm here representing everyone that, I'm trying to at least. And when I'm at town meeting, I am speaking for myself, but you can't remove the fact that you're a budget committee member. And so this person, said, you've already had your chance. You've already put your vote out there. You don't now get to come here and what?
They don't know how you voted.
Right. Well, maybe they watched. I don't know. But I'm just saying, so I would feel more comfortable having done what Jerry has asked and, really come to an understanding here so that we can educate there, but I'm not up there trying to make a case that I should have made here.
Can I interject something? Only because I'm getting live texts from our town clerk about the election. What she was talking about, what she must be watching.
Yeah.
Hello there, Jessica.
So,
Wages have gone up so much. It might cost us $7,500
right, so
this
I'm just
year.
gonna read you what you said and I'll let you continue your conversation. I'm not gonna interject. FYI, there are 3 elections this coming year, same as last year, responding to Heather's comment. And then I said, well, no federal though, right? And she says, I think someone just put federal on that line. It should be election payroll. And I said, why do we need as much payroll this year with no big election? She says, we still have municipal, school, and November referendum. So there are still 3 elections this year. Still 3 12-hour, 3 times where the polls are open for 12 hours.
Right.
So whether there's 8,000 people coming through or 800 people coming through,
Right. I think it's the amount of time,
or 100.
I'm making assumptions here because I haven't done the role and to the respect really of the entire town hall, none of us have done the role for, well, no, last year was federal, wasn't it?
So my question would
22.
then
So we
be-
haven't done one that's not federal, like a presidential election. I think, and my assumption is you're not here as late counting.
or
There's less-
absentee.
there's
Like,
less
if you look
ballots
at
to
the-
count.
You're open for those hours and
You're open
still
for
have
the
same
12,
amount.
but you can't count during those 12.
But how do you start? I mean, my problem is, okay, so now they're counting for 3 hours instead of 5 hours. I mean, now we're not talking about significant changes.
I don't know, we're just talking about
Split
past.
hairs at that
It's
point.
usually half on a non-federal year.
This discrepancy, and they have to recount.
Right, then it is,
Last,
yeah.
so last year, when the question was raised at this meeting, why, because what happened was it got doubled. It went from 37 to 75. And so the answer was, the reason why it was doubled was because of the primary and the big election.
Right. It does take more man hours is what's been explained over the past few years, but.
So this all has to do.
No,
with the
no,
motion.
it
Yeah,
doesn't-
There's a motion before the committee.
Right, it doesn't have to do with just
that one
that
line.
one line.
If people don't want to revisit it, it's fine. I voted no all along, so even if somebody wants to tell me, well, you can't speak at town meeting because you voted no, well, I'm trying to explain to you why I voted no. So,
So let's have the vote, see where it goes.
yeah, or I can.
Because it's already been moved and seconded, right?
I'll call the vote if that's what we're asking for.
Please do.
I mean, we're an hour and a half in, so.
Right. So let's call the vote and see if people want to revisit the admin budget. Vote. Or
All right.
reconsider. Would you say reconsider?
You move to it.
Reconsider.
And it only takes a majority. Josh looked it up. It's not
Okay.
2/3.
Go Josh.
So what I would like, one other thing besides the historic election situation.
We've called the vote. Can we still have discussion?
I'm letting this discussion go on.
We can see this 31% increase, right? And that's looking at just what has happened from the beginning of 2022 to the end of 2022. And if we look back at 2021, and I know there was, market adjustments, COLAs, this, that, the other thing. There are multiple lines where multiple employees have seen a 25% pay increase in that time frame.
From 2021 till
from
Today.
the end of 2021 to the end of 2022. And so it goes back to what I originally said when we first started talking, is that the way that this is embedded in this makes it difficult. And so the only tool that we have is the total number. I feel like, even if the structure has typically been that people, I don't know what this, I mean, if this is a
What
complete
would you like the number to
anomaly,
be?
I would like the number to be-
Nobody said what the
So,
number was.
and just to clarify, so far, the only change, what we voted on, and approved was was $15,000 less, with contingency funds in mind. Based on what you're saying, you'd like to perhaps reduce it by a few thousand because of that election payroll
She's
line.
not done yet.
Do you have anything else? Just so we have, that, because that might
Yes.
influence how people vote, whether or not to reconsider.
right? So what I'm trying to do is not put the voters in a situation where we are continually inheriting this type of pay structure on an annual basis, where then it just continues to snowball.
Well, we don't want to know why. We want to know what. What are you saying to cut? That's, and then we can have the discussion once we know.
We have an idea of what you're gonna do. That's gonna influence how we vote, whether or not to reconsider the vote.
Tell us where your cuts are going to be, Heather, and then we can vote and have the discussion. So I appreciate you wanting to give them the context,
Yeah.
but that's putting the
So,
cat before the
so
horse.
I'm uncomfortable with the way that the pay structure in this is going. And so rather than taking 5% of the year-end annualized total, right? And I don't know if that's how this is done. That's definitely not how I give my raises in my business. And so we're not giving people a raise on the money that they've made. We're giving people a raise on the money that we are projecting that they're going to make. And like Kevin said, that always ends up being a higher amount than what was originally budgeted for. It just feels like this constant snowball effect to the point that multiple positions have received 25 to 27% pay increase from the end of
If- if-
2021
Some
to
of that is
2022.
increase
I'll
in
be
hours.
specific.
If-
I'll be
Call the vote.
specific.
Can I
I'll be
challenge
specific
that?
to
I don't
allow
think
you to
that's
call
an
the
accurate
vote.
statement.
Go ahead.
Yeah. With the
I
possible
was
exception
gonna
of public works plow drivers.
I was gonna open up, if it got reconsidered, to decrease in the bottom line to about 520,000. And if you look at the inherited 2022 budget into 2023, it's a 5.92% increase, which is on par with what the other departments have been. Now, I haven't had time to refigure the numbers, finding out that the manager's salary is under contract, so we're stuck with that. But there you go. If it's reopened for a vote, that's where I would start the discussion. So,
So did you
All right.
consider that there's increase in hours for those guys
yes,
from 32 to 36, I guess it was? is that right?
yes.
I think you technically have to call the vote because.
I'm going to now. So now,
You can go.
there's a motion, and it's been seconded to reconsider the vote previously taken regarding the administration operating budget. Those in favor of reconsidering our vote, please say so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a vote 5-3. All right, so now I'll take a motion.
So as I said, and I don't know if I want to make it a motion, because honestly, I'm open to discussion and adjusting the number a little bit, but if I were to make a motion, and you guys tell me if you want me to make a motion, we can vote it down and then have a discussion with a new number. As I said, I tried to put in the numbers, and I guess I should, well, it won't automatically recalculate because I'm not as good as Kevin on spreadsheets, but when I had worked my numbers and things, to be honest with you, what I thought in my mind, because it was that if you just got hired this year, I know I was always taught if you go into a job, the amount that you ask for, you're assuming you're not going to get a raise in the next couple of years. So, don't, as everyone who has said, I was a really good negotiator for what I got paid.
Good for him, yeah.
And well, several of them have said that. So I went into it where I came up with the 520 is I went into it thinking that number one, we wouldn't be doing COLAs for people that were just hired less than a year.
Sorry, that is a policy decision, and that
I'm
is
explaining
not
where I
within-
came to my number. I'm not saying people have to agree with it. I'm just saying where I came to my number.
You wait for discussion.
I'm sorry.
Just wait for our discussion.
Okay.
Oh, recognition.
So I came to it based on that and based on negating the 15,000, which the budget already recommended negating. And honestly, it came to 516, 317, and I bumped it up to the 520. So
So the actual amount that you reduced it because of that percent difference, can you give me that number?
say this again.
The number that you used, you gave an explanation about the increase. So you came down to 516.
Yeah, when I put the numbers into the spreadsheet and it debited it all, it came to 516, 317.
And then you just
I was like, well,
rounded it off.
I was like, okay, people might think that's a little bit too tight of a number. So, and I like nice round numbers. You come to my business, you're not charged $1.99 for something. It's $2. So I just have $520,000.
So
Which, if you figure out what the inherited budget is $490,925.27. So if you're looking at the inherited budget, it's a 5.92% increase from the inherited budget.
What's an
What's an
inherited budget?
inherited budget?
Inherited budget is the budget that Jerry was handed because of the last two town managers and the select board making hirings at a higher wage than what was budgeted for at the 2022 meeting. So the way I was trying to look at it is, what is Jerry actually asking for a department increase? You had the fire department was actually asking for a 6% increase, same with the public works or 5 something. So I was trying to,
The difference, though, if I may, can I, Mel?
Yes, sir. Yes.
The difference, though, is that Public Works and Fire Department are essentially status quo budgets. No operational changes proposed by those department heads. No, change in how they do their work. It's just standard what we did last year, plus inflation, extra cost of utilities, labor, whatever.
This
But
still-
there are significant changes, operational changes proposed in the administration budget.
I didn't cut those. When I was
Well,
adjusting
when
my
you're-
numbers,
when
I
you're-
didn't
Wait,
cut those.
one at a time, please.
When you're trying to take the percent increase in administration to a level comparable to what there is for fire and public works, that's exactly what you're doing. You're
Okay,
trying to make
actually,
it a
I
status
increased
quo
it to
budget.
that. I increased it to that, to be honest with you.
So can I speak for a minute? Is that, okay. So, I'm not, I don't know if I'm agreeing with the change in the COLA or anything like that, but here's my thought process of how to get it down. If you took the $7,500 election budget and you lowered it to 38, which was a normal, regular year, that would save you $3,700. If you took the health family plan out and moved it to a single, it would save you $13,651, which if he has to hire someone with a family plan, he has the ability to go, and I wouldn't vote undesignated funds, but he can go to the emergency fund that has $16,000 in it that he could ask the town select board and the budget committee to vote on. So he'd have access to that, but it wouldn't be in the budget to be in the budget every year. So if I subtract those out, it comes to 521,273. So we're kind of on target the same way. It's just a different thought process.
I would say that using emergency funds as your backup to fund an operational expense that you just don't want to put in the budget is not good practice.
Why not?
Because that's not an emergency. An emergency is the pipes froze over at Eureka Center or something of that, but just to say that to underfund legitimate operational items and say, well, we can just take the money out of the emergency fund, which only has $16,000 in it. Now, if that fund had like $200,000 in it, I'd be like, yeah, okay, but it's only got $16,000 in it, which doesn't take much to spend $16,000 in an emergency, right? I mean, that could get sucked up by Eureka.
Are we
the phone
replacing that
calls.
emergency fund at all this year?
There is no warrant article this year to put money in the emergency fund.
So that leads me to, well, we'll talk about that after. Although it might impact this, so maybe we should talk about it now. If there's no warrant article, when you were talking about what our bylaws are and what our task is, do we have the capability to make a budgetary recommendation
To them,
only to them?
Yeah.
Okay.
you can get up to the town floor and make all the recommendations you want.
But if it's not a warrant article, like if we were interested in doing what you're saying, what you suggested in the emergency fund, for whatever reason, right? Because $16,000 isn't a lot of money. And there's no warrant article to address that, then I get up at town floor and I say that. But if there's no warrant article, how does that happen?
So if we did the contingency change and the election payroll change, just making sure that I didn't fudge anything
If you
else.
just did that, it would be 535,924.
No,
Okay,
you gotta take.
And didn't we already
15,000.
make that change? I mean,
I
it
included
seemed like on both votes, we voted out the contingency.
we did vote out the contingency.
So that
We
five-
just didn't do
I've included
the
that.
payroll amount.
Yeah,
My thought is, if it turns out you didn't need that family,
Mhm.
so there's that little extra in the budget should something else be needed, was because maybe somebody, to use a previous argument, maybe someone else changes from a single to a family. So there's your contingency. We've already reduced, we reduced the original budget by 15. So now if we reduce, which brought us down to 538,624, I wouldn't touch the salary, but based on what I just said. But then if we now reduce the election payroll by the 3,700 that Jane just mentioned, you now have 538,624 minus 3,700, and you come out to 535,924. And if we vote this motion down, that would be my recommendation.
What is the motion right now?
There is no motion. I was
Oh.
just having discussion.
If you were to make a motion, you were going to do 520.
Yeah, because I wanted to have discussion as a board, like.
I'll make a motion.
I can think.
I make a motion that the town appropriates $535,924 for the administration budget. Is there a second?
I second it.
It's been moved by Milt and seconded by Neil that the town appropriates raises $535,924 for the administrative operation budget. Discussion. Any
I
discussion?
think my thought process with the taking that out is I believe those funds are going to be spent no matter what, because we're going to hire an accounting service. And that was already brought up to be $70,000. So we need $70,000 to do that.
So you're changing your thought process?
No, I'm just saying,
Oh.
I'm just saying that money will be spent. There is no,
Which money?
the money,
24.5.
the 24.5 is going to be spent because it's From what I
It's not a
heard,
guarantee, but they're definitely leaning, the town manager
So-
is definitely leaning.
and do I
towards
think the
contract.
accounting services need it? I think we need to get our act together there, absolutely. Or the books need to be reconciled, but my fear is that if we do that, that's permanently in the budget for the budget process on that line, no matter what. So next year, they're gonna look for that plus more.
Or if somebody comes in and doesn't need it. I mean, the old deputy treasurer used the family plan.
Mhm.
And so, we're kind of making an assumption, just because nobody else is using it here, we're just kind of riding the hope that nobody will ever use the family.
Well, I know, which is kind of crazy, but,
And according to this, she didn't.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, it's been moved and seconded that the town raises $535,900, or appropriates $535,924 for the administrative operational budget. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, it's a vote. 5 to,
I was
all those against, because I don't have someone's abstaining. So 5
I
to
did.
3.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's number 535.
535,
I thought it was-
924, and the reduction was the 15 for contingency, and we took 37.
Half of the election.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know if it comes out exactly that, but yeah,
Okay.
works for you.
Jessica's just gonna have to count faster.
Well, it's a classic. We're gonna do what we need
Who
to do
would
for the
know?
elections.
Me and Joe.
Right.
They gotta get paid for it.
Right.
I
Those
think, I don't
opposed
know
are
if
always-
Mark voted yes or no.
It was Jill and Jane that voted no.
Oh, so
And again, they
so
can
it's 5
put
to 2,
any
that doesn't make it 6
amounts
to
in
2?
any line they
And
want to, as long as.
Oh, do
the
you did
bottom
too?
line
Oh,
is
Mark, I'm
fine.
sorry.
Mark
Mark,
voted
I'm
no.
sorry.
All right, so was there any, did you want more discussion regarding undesignated funds? Heather, you said you did?
Yeah.
All right, so let's move the discussion to that.
Oh, sorry, my kid just got home. So,
Want me to go?
yeah, thanks.
Me personally, I'm concerned because, for my own fault, my brain was a little fried Thursday night and I didn't realize that the overspent was gonna be voted on prior. That I'm actually not comfortable increasing the transfer for more than $200,000 to cover this budget. For a couple of reasons. One, we don't really know how much is in undesignated budget, and I don't want to spend it down too far until we truly do know how much is in it. And to Neil's point too, that we don't tend to transfer that amount, and I would rather have a little bit extra that we might be able to dip into next year if this inflation and everything keeps going the way that it's going, that we have a little bit of a protection and an option.
I have a question, Neil. Before the meeting started, you were trying to arrive at a total number and you were saying 10 million.
I was talking to Kevin about a policy proposal that I want to make that makes it a policy for the town to have 60% of the total town budget for the undesignated fund. But the language, it's either the total expenditures or the total, I don't know what the right word is, money raised.
Oh, the assessment, you mean?
Yeah, the assessment.
Yeah, the assessment is what we actually charge in taxes.
So
Raise
the 2 months worth and arriving at the 1.6 was being based off an 8 million and change number.
Yes,
Well,
that was my number.
well, the 16% on 10 million would be 1.6 million. Right?
Yes.
So right now, so in Jill, you're right that we don't know we don't know exactly what's, with 100% confidence, what's in undesignated, because Trio has a higher number than the auditor's report. We're very comfortable with the auditor's report. The auditor's
Right,
report
we know
is
it's at
kinda
least
like-
1.9.
Right.
Right.
The auditor's report is 1.9. This year, but that's the end of 21 number, okay, that 1.95. That's the report, that was the 21 audit, okay? So we know in 22 that we appropriated and used 76,000 and change or something like that. And we also know we rolled 136,000-ish from unspent 22 funds back into undesignated this year.
But
So-
that will be lower because of our overspenditures.
Yeah. So I'll get there. So that puts us at about roughly a confident level that we think there's a minimum of 2 million, right? So we're talking, so you have a $400,000 amount before you would get the 1.6, which is 16% of the 10 million that Neil's talking about. So even using the 230 plus the overages, we will still be well above the 16% number, and possibly even higher than that, depending on how Trio and the auditor's report reconcile against each
Yeah,
other.
if we could find that 500,000.
I guess-
Awesome.
I guess kind of the thoughts in my head is, and maybe I'm just more conservative with my business, because, I also have been told, try and have in savings 2 months worth of expenses. And the auditor told us that in 2021, 2 months worth of expenses was $1.6 million. We've made a lot of increase in our expenses since 2021. So,
Well, I spoke with the auditor about this today. I don't know if you were in the room, and I asked her, because we were trying to get a handle on numbers, be a little bit more definitive, and to make sure we weren't going too deep. And I definitely came out of that conversation completely comfortable that we aren't going too deep. Because she said there's nothing magical about the 16% rule or the 2-month rule or whatever. It's really ultimately it's what the town is comfortable with. She said she's seen towns as low as 8%, in terms of expenditures, and other towns are much more conservative. It's kind of all over the place. So
So the other argument that I would make about this situation is that we still are currently on a January to December year, and we keep hearing the town manager talk about cash flow, and that we are at levels where a TAN comes into place. And so the more that we take out of undesignated, the less the closer it puts us into that situation, which is another reason why, at least for this year, until we do get the books all straightened out and we know exactly what we have available, I would like to see us be a little bit more conservative right here, right now, for that reason. If we change our fiscal year and we split the tax collection so that our cash flow situation is better, then maybe I would be more comfortable going down, to a lower recommendation. But right now, given the fact that we keep hearing about this cash flow problem, we would end up paying interest on a TAN, that type of thing. I would like to see us be conservative, especially because we are able to use the ARPA funds in addition to, the other stuff that we're doing.
yeah, I'm not proposing we go below 200. The budget committee voted to go above 200, transferring to the operation budget. And my thoughts kind of was, so I don't like the word free money, whether it was ARPA or whether it's undesignated fund, you still got it from me at one point in time. But, right now, in a sense, we're talking about using $500,000 of unraised funds to cover this budget.
Well, the undesignated was raised at one point.
And unraised this year.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a phrase that I
Sorry.
don't use the F
I
word.
keep interrupting you. I'm sorry.
But so I'm not comfortable going above the 200,000. I would like to see where we land next year.
That's not an unreasonable.
And, right, I'm just explaining my position. I'd like to see where we land next year.
Not that.
And then maybe that allows us, instead of using our traditional 70 or our traditional just transferring over unspent from the last fiscal year, it allows us to dip into undesignated a little bit more. Somebody also asked me this question, and I'm not an accountant, I have no clue. But we keep talking about we want to change our calendar year. And how do we do that without a huge tax impact to the citizens? And one person did say to me, if we find out our undesignated is flush at that $2.5 million or $2.4 million, is it possible to use that
As a bridge.
as our bridge of changing a calendar year? And I don't know the answer. So that's the other reason why I'd like to be a little more conservative in what we transfer. Because if the answer is yes, I'm going to really be kicking myself in the butt if I voted to use some of it
So
this year.
I mean, you can always use, whether it's for a bridge for that or whatever, every dollar you use of undesignated is one less dollar you
Mhm.
have to raise. So like, it goes the other way too. Every dollar less you use of undesignated is a dollar more you have to raise, right? So without going down the rabbit hole of fiscal year, I'll give you the 30,000 foot
Thank
version.
you. I want to know that. What's
Yeah.
that gonna do?
So, basically what happens is you have the choice, you have to either do to get on the, July, June cadence, at some point what the town will have to do is either do after we go through this process, immediately do another 6-month budget, or you go through this process with an 18-month budget. So to kind of get you on that cadence. And then what happens is you start collecting taxes every 6 months or twice a year instead of once a year. On paper, what happens is that citizens, somewhere along the line, you pay 18 months of taxes in a 12-month period. But that sounds scary.
Yeah.
But it's really, it doesn't mean you're not paying it in advance. So what happens is you come around and you pass that that budget, right, the 18-month budget. So what you would do is, let's say now that August payment, for the sake of argument, stays in August, you're paying 6 months. Well, you've just paid your year coming out of the last calendar budget. And then 6 months later, you're paying 6 months. So that's your 18 months within 12-month period. But you're basically paying part of the next 12 months early.
Right.
So if you have escrow, the money's been going into the escrow for those 6 months.
Right.
And rather than waiting to come around in 12 months, you're sending a check at 6 months. So it's not like people have to save up an extra 6 months of tax money and pay in advance. That's one of the things that really scares people about moving this way, is that they think that's going to happen.
That makes sense for people who have a mortgage, but for
Yeah, if you're
older people that are on a fixed income, that situation is scary.
But it's still the same thing though, Heather, because whatever method you're using to set money aside for property taxes, whether it's a private savings account or an escrow account or whatever, it's.
Hopefully people are being
You're
prudent.
just sending half of your payment early and not waiting for the.
Which is why I think, there has to be time, especially for people who are on a fixed income, to prepare for that. And I can't remember what the answer was. I know I've asked this question before about whether or not we vote as a town to do that, or if the town manager has the authority to
It's
just
not,
do
it's the
that.
select board. The
Okay.
select board as in this form of government, select board has sole authority on setting tax assessment dates and setting town meeting dates. And when to call a town meeting. But I agree 100%. I think, and Jerry and I have talked about this, that a change like that, even though you don't technically have to have a town meeting vote on it, there's a huge communication and education
Absolutely.
and planning aspect of it. So it would be the type of thing that, you would probably announce that you're going to do like a year from now.
Right.
Not going to show up at a town meeting on April 1st and say, okay, by the way, this July we're moving to a fiscal year, and so you can expect this. It needs to be well communicated and planned like way in advance.
So what I'm hearing, the people are not having to come up with extra money. It's just their,
Planned.
It's a timing
Right,
thing.
Yeah,
right.
come up with
So
it soon.
as long as somebody is budgeting every month, there shouldn't be a problem.
Right.
But if
right.
they're not budgeting and they're waiting for some windfall that comes once a year,
Like
pay
your
their
tax rebate.
taxes, I don't know.
Yeah.
Then
but
they
our
would be in
current
trouble.
tax collection doesn't really align with tax rebate time anyway. right?
No, our current one
It's a
doesn't.
tax rebate.
So I'm in agreement with the thought of the 200,000.
I haven't.
Mark? When I listening to the select board when they came up with that amount, I was comfortable with their rationale of doing it. For me, it's unrealistic to hope or to do things that keep taxes flat, because that's not real. You can keep them flat for so long, and then you're going to pay.
Jump.
So to use undesignated funds to lower the burden, as I think the select would have used that verbiage before, is appropriate. But to use higher amounts so that there's hardly any increase at all. We know historically that's not, we paid that price. We paid that price 15 years ago, when then for the next dozen years or so, we could not tap the undesignated funds because, when I first started on the budget committee, every budget had undesignated funds thrown into it. And without keeping track of it, we got to a point that we couldn't use undesignated funds anymore. So I'd rather take a conservative role and use it to lower ease the burden.
Yeah.
Supplement, but not. Taxes need to go up. It's
what's your motion?
unrealistic. Yeah, well,
What's your motion?
my motion would what?
When you said taxes need to go up, her face.
I
For the school's 4.6%.
We have no control of that. Go to the grocery store and tell them they don't have a
You
right
do
to
have
charge.
control of the school budget. You need to
Well,
go to their meetings.
I've
and
been to
brush
their-
your-
I'm just focusing on
Yeah,
our
doesn't work.
budget. And I think it's unreal that we've done very, very well. And I commend the select board. And the select board has worked, and the budget committee have worked well with each other, I think, the last few years. And I'm in total agreement. And I know not everybody loves my points of view sometimes. But tax increases have been minimal, a lot less than other towns. You can't have a 0 or a 0.5% increase every year forever. It's not realistic. I don't want to see a 7% increase. I don't want to see a 6% increase. I'd fight against a 5% increase. But if we're only talking, 2, 3, 4% increase, to me is realistic. And so I don't want to use undesignated funds to keep a tax increase flat, because something's going to come up in the future that's going to save the day. And if we don't have the monies, then we're doomed. Yeah.
Well, I think it goes to the point that all the stuff Neil's been doing, which is it is the taxpayers' money that's sitting in there. So we talk about what's the safe amount. $2 million isn't going to be much of a bridge for that extra 6 months. We're spending $800,000 a month. 2 months later, our reserve fund's gone. So we're going to have to tax differently. But I guess we don't need to do it tonight, and we go back to 200 or 230, whatever it is. But we ought to have a plan that says we don't need to just keep putting money into the bank, taking it from the voter to put in the bank. What is the right amount to keep? And I'm not sure we're ready to decide that this evening. But if you go to 250, it takes us down to 1.7 million, give or take. We think 1.6 is good. So to me, that's still conservative. So what I'm trying to say is, as a group, as a town, we need to say this, we need to be at 16% safety line, 15%, 20%. Let's pick a number, and then that would make our job easier to say, we're gonna be at 22%. We can do 300,000 next year, or we can buy a new fire truck with it.
Rod, did you want to speak?
I just wanted to, we're talking about so many different things here. What number are we trying to
Okay.
work to here?
I would like to
And-
make a motion to revisit the funding article of appropriating undesignated funds to the operating budget, because I would like to be in line with the select board's previous recommendation of $200,000.
Is there a second?
I was thinking it.
All right, I'll take that. So it's been moved by Jill and seconded by Rod that we revisit our previous vote regarding the amount to appropriate from the undesignated fund balance used towards the 2023 budget appropriation. Is there any further discussion?
I would ask the selectmen, are they gonna stay at 200, or are they gonna go to 236 to cover?
Well, so I put that number out there as my opinion. I mean, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to have that discussion as a board right now, because we're not in a board open meeting.
Gotcha.
So I think that will be a board discussion when we meet on the 14th.
Can we give personal opinions? I would leave it at the 236. I mean, to me personally, what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm not picking up everything that you're saying, but I think it's a little contradictory to, I mean, I'll just leave it at that, and I think that number is appropriate.
So may I clarify, Josh? You say 236, so that's the total of the overspent articles along with a 200,000 transfer? Because we voted 230, I thought,
Right, and that was to cover the
for just
extra for
operating
solid waste
budget.
contract, and there was a public works thing. So
Right.
There was a gas increase.
30,000.
Yeah.
There was a gas increase and there was
Hmm.
a solid waste
Right,
increase.
and that amount was 230, it went to
Right,
230.
Right, the budget committee voted for 230 on operation budget. Josh said 236, so I was just trying to clarify where he got that number from.
I think the difference is, the 236 comes from, the most recent solid waste.
It was 16,000 for gas and
Yeah, that's like another, or maybe that 236.
So the simple answer then, Josh, is
two
236 is what you're recommending just for operating budget.
The initial recommendation is 200, right? So the board will discuss, because when we do our final vote, a board member may make a motion to change that based upon information that came in after we said the initial. vote.
Okay.
And just to point out to everyone, so if 200,000 was approved, it covers the 14,344.90 overage from the
Yeah.
solid waste. It
Yeah.
covers the 8,638 from the fire department overage, and it covers the 30,000 extra for the fuel increase in solid waste. And it still adds an extra $10,000 to
I
make
think you
come
did
up
what
with 200,000.
I think
For
you
what,
did
Tom?
you did the solid waste and the gas twice.
So the
No,
36
I
the
didn't.
36 comes from, I remember, it, 36 comes from 16 for gas, and then I just rounded it another 20 for solid waste. That's where I came up with.
For 2023.
For 23, yeah.
Right.
That
That
was
doesn't
number 30.
include the
Right,
other
those are
three.
separate questions on the warrant, and there's,
Right.
There's really no debate about
Yes, you're right, no.
those two things.
Right.
So total coming out of undesignated funds, you're thinking 236 to cover the 2023 budget, plus the overage
Plus the, what
is
is it, another 23,
From
22 or something.
22.
22,000 from the 22.
Rod,
Yep.
and my
But
point
that
is
gets
200
deducted from 236.
already covers it.
No.
The over-
200,000
Gets deducted from
covers-
undesignated.
Oh, it gets added in.
Okay,
So-
that's
Yeah,
what,
that line.
thank you. That's what I was uncomfortable with.
So I I'm gonna throw out my opinion too, is that, the select board's gonna have to make a decision, if I have it in my mind right, that if you only agree to say 200, the number 200, then the balance will be raised to cover the
Correct.
other expenses. I just want, so everybody's, I just kind of like.
Yes,
real
you can
forward.
say
So
the budget committee
everybody-
wants to raise the
So
funds.
everybody's gonna be sitting there at town meeting and you're gonna go and defend
Yeah,
wholeheartedly why you wanna raise
Absolutely.
taxes versus going into
Yes.
undesignated funds with all the rationale behind you.
yes.
And there's not gonna be any debate.
I will say that,
I'm not gonna do that.
I am swayed by Milt's argument about because we know, like I said earlier, we know that it's gonna go up at some point, and so part of the question is, do you
When
take
and where.
a little one this year and a smaller one next year, or a bigger one next year?
Right. And I feel like with the ARPA funds as part of it,
I
that
don't see
I
ARPA
would
as
rather
part of
see
it.
that
Yeah.
split
I don't
than,
understand that.
well, because if you're looking at the schedule, right, if you're looking at what equipment and what the things on the plan were that needed to be replaced, some of those things are things that needed to be replaced in this cycle or next cycle. And so if we're using ARPA funds to cover those, reducing the tax burden, if we didn't have that as an option, then we would either be having to transfer or raise to pay for those things. And so so we are using ARPA in an appropriate way, right? But those things are not things that weren't an expectation on the horizon. It's not just like we're going to put in a trail system that we hadn't already accounted for. Those are items that were in the plan and we're saving that money. If we didn't have ARPA, we would be having to raise or transfer to cover those expenses if we're sticking to the plan.
And if we voted for them.
Right.
I mean, that's the question.
Right.
So right now, the motion is whether or not to reconsider our earlier vote. It's very, are we ready to take a vote?
I thought we
Any further
just, did we
discussion?
say-
We're,
okay.
we're voting to revisit.
All
Yeah,
right,
yes,
so
okay.
it's been moved and seconded that we reconsider our earlier vote to, for the amount we want to appropriate from the undesignated fund balance used towards the 2023 budget appropriation. Those in favor of reconsidering our previous vote, please indicate so. 1, 2, 3, 4 to 4.
Don't have a majority. All right, moving on. What's the last thing on the?
That was it. It was just answering the question of, and you got the select board.
Well, Neil had a proposition and I would like to hear.
I want to hear that too, but
On that
I
proposal.
had one well, I have a question about it, and then I wanted to discuss as a committee so that I don't know how it would work, okay? Number one, if we were going to have a special election to appropriate the remaining ARPA funds, do you see that coinciding with like a school budget vote or another? What I'm trying to do is preemptively save the cost of another special meeting.
There may not, that'll be up to the future board, that very likely you'll be sitting on.
We don't have enough money.
You don't need this, you don't need to have a
I knew that
special.
was coming.
Yeah, you guys can spend that, right?
The town doesn't have to vote on that?
It does, but it doesn't have to be, you can wait, it's only
Well, right,
another.
but I don't want to wait. So that's my
Okay, then if you don't
point.
wanna wait, then you
So
would have to have a
my
special
public
town.
comment at the select board meeting was going to be because I mean, I feel like across all of these conversations about ARPA and all of the conversations outside of official meetings and this, that, and the other thing is that, the technology upgrades that need to be made at the Eureka Center to have that become an option for a meeting space are really important to people. And so I would like to see that amount of money that is remaining that hasn't been allocated out of ARPA, either on this warrant, I would like to see it on this warrant, to, even though we don't have a number the way we didn't before about how much the computers were going to cost and stuff like that, I think that the sentiment that I have gathered from, all of the different committees and the meetings and the residents is that that's where they would like to see that money spent. And so I would like to see that as a warrant article, that whatever our dollar amount is after we've allocated this, is that money is going to go to that purpose. And so in a preemptive way, I know we don't have a budget article, but I mean a warrant article, but we don't technically have any warrant articles yet. If I go to the select board meeting on Tuesday and officially, ask for that, we're here now rather than having to reconvene, take a vote on whether, if that were to become, I don't even know if that's legal, to become a warrant article, that we would take a vote to either recommend or not.
So select board, can asking the town how to spend ARPA funds, can that be just a question on a ballot for this, when we have an election for the school board vote? Or can it be on a ballot for November? Or does it need to truly be a town meeting?
No, so you can, it needs to be a town meeting, but you can call a referendum town meeting. So like, for instance, you could, like we did during the pandemic.
Right,
So you
okay.
could call a special town meeting and that coincides with the school budget validation
And just
vote,
have it on
and
paper?
have a ballot there that does, you gotta need to go back and put in your election funds.
Yep.
Because now you've gone into 30 days of absentee voting and the paper ballots. and-
Which is why I'm proposing
Oh,
that
that's
we do
Isn't it
this
30 days
Oh,
of
wait, no,
absentee
actually, I take
voting
that
in
back.
November?
If you have, anytime you have a referendum vote, and this is state law, absentee ballots need to be available for 30 days. In fact, even for, because our municipal elections is a written, its technical name is secret ballot election, absentee ballots are available 30 days, will be available 30 days before town meeting to come here and do the
But we're
vote.
already doing that in November anyways.
Well, why are you worried about the ARPA money? It's there, it's ours.
No, I'm not worried
She
about
wants to
it.
spend
What
it.
I'm,
Spend it.
I want the
Why?
funds to be available because I feel like the upgrades there were really high on the priority list. Like that was what has come out of every public hearing and, all of that stuff. And all of the things that we're using the ARPA funds for don't address that at all. And so what amount is left there, rather than have to wait, call another meeting, do absentee ballots, blah, blah, blah. We're in this situation where we're allocating these ARPA funds. I personally feel like that was the number one priority to people. And I would just like to see us just take care of it now so that we don't have to wait. That's where I am on that.
I think the biggest problem is we don't know what Eureka is gonna cost us.
That's exactly it.
I
That's
mean,
why
I think it's
not-
more, what's 23,000 for technology, but you're gonna have, there's no handicap ADA restroom, there's no parking lot. I mean, we got a bunch of stone and it works fine occasionally. There's no lights. I just think there's a lot of money and I'm all for doing
And if we
Eureka.
vote for it, we can't unvote for it.
What do you mean, like if it's ARPA funds?
Yeah,
Yeah, you can. You tend, like, for instance, it would take another special time meeting, but you'd have to have a town vote. Do you want to reallocate, to a different purpose?
I think we have time to do our homework and just have it in November.
And that's why we weren't ready. And, and I don't necessarily agree that like that was the overwhelming number one thing. I mean, we heard a lot of things. What we heard, the main message was use it to offset known capital expenses. So that's what we've done. But definitely a lot of people there is energy to upgrade the Eureka for those purposes, but the board didn't feel we were ready to go anywhere with it yet because we don't have any cost information. So that's work that needs to be done, as soon as can reasonably be done and get the question before voters. It wasn't ready to go.
Is there a timeframe on that opera funds?
No,
We have to, well, there is,
Yeah.
you have to allocate it, or in essence, voters have to vote on what to do with it by the end of 24, and then you have to actually have spent all the money by the end of 26.
Right.
So you have some time.
I thought it was in our bank account.
It is.
Huh?
I thought it was
You
in
have
our
to,
bank
you have to
account.
send it back.
Can't
to
see
them.
It is.
Right, but at the end of 26, you have to return it if it's not spent.
That's not gonna happen.
No. The only thing, yeah, and I don't think we're in danger of it, but you hear in the news when they talk about funding things about, retrieving unspent COVID money. That's what they're talking about.
Right.
That money.
So Neil, what was your proposition? You want to present a policy. You were at least considering presenting a policy to the select board, and I'd like to hear more about it. I can make a motion to see if everybody else wants to hear more about it, because we can have coffee, but.
That's not relevant to.
But if it's something you want,
While the select board's here, don't we want to answer the question about municipal capital and the money we can't,
nobody has the answer.
or maybe they
What's the
do.
question?
So, the reserve fund balance spreadsheet shows that the balance as of January 1st, 22, there was $97,632 in the municipal capital. And then it's showing as of 12/31, the balance is $30,512. And we haven't been able to get an answer of what happened to that 60, it shows $60,000 less.
Well, we know it's for the market eval, but where is it?
We don't know where it was entered. If it was
Is it an
taken from
assessment?
there, where was it put?
I think it's still in that account. So 60,000 was appropriated. So what's not here is, so 60,000 appropriated, it wasn't spent. And so there's nothing here in the unspent appropriation column. So, and that's what it was. So it stays in that account. I think it's just not showing.
It's only $60.
Everybody all
It's
right?
not.
So
Jesus,
Wow,
it's not
I
showing.
know, I'm saying, that's
Kevin,
scary.
is the money in that account, is that only for the assessing, or is that money for other purposes as well?
No, that's it. That's in the municipal capital account.
Right.
Can't be spent.
Now, actually, you know what? That might be where it is. We did, because we set up it's a municipal reserve. There's a reserve account for assessing it, but this is the first year. We're just setting it up because we're setting aside some money each year. That's one of the
Right.
questions to save up to pay for the full assessment. So I don't think we put anything in there yet. So I don't have a clear answer to the question. But it wasn't spent, I can tell you that. It's in an account somewhere, you know, it wasn't spent.
And then if I have questions about like specific revenue lines, I don't expect that you guys are gonna have the answer to that. And none of us are gonna have the answer to that. Is that an appropriate thing? Like I had asked Jerry for a meeting for that type of thing, right? To not take up everybody's time, asking about specific revenue lines.
The revenue lines, most of them represent actual revenue that we took in.
Right. So there's one line, miscellaneous, and my understanding is that two things were put into that line, and that line is not showing anywhere near the total of those two things.
I don't know what that might be, but we know, I mean, one thing we do know is that this is another leg of the Trio issue. And it's not the problem with the Trio tool, it's a problem of things not being posted properly. And so there's a lot that, there's going to be probably a fair amount of, what's the proper term, like ledger book or whatever, adjustments, like, you know what?
Journal
this-
entries.
Yeah, right, journal adjust. This money was supposed to be over here, and this money was supposed to be over here, so that's part of what's made it a challenge to put together a clear, this is where we are picture, because there's been so much disorganization in those postings. So they're working on figuring all that out, and kind of, the term we've been using is, you know, reestablishing the baseline so that going forward, you know, we're speaking intelligently and there's not much speculation. So but to that one, they'd have to go into Trio and see what was posted specifically against that. And if you had something specific in mind, well, what about this thing? They'd have to find it in Trio and find where it was posted, and maybe an adjustment needs to be made. So, but I don't think that's something that necessarily needs to be resolved.
No,
Part of the
I don't
budget
either. But that's the thing where, like, the point that I keep making is that there are these things that I would like to scrutinize, right? And there's never that opportunity. And I'm just trying to be respectful of everybody's time, asking for a meeting to be able to do that kind of thing.
Suggestion though, but I mean, we're about to go off and get somebody to look at this and reconcile the books. I mean, asking the question before that's reconciled doesn't seem to be a prudent use of time. So it's probably.
John?
I would like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Well,
we were gonna give Neil a chance. We wanna let the select board leave. We were gonna give Neil a chance to explain his policy idea. So if there's no more questions for any of the select board representatives, thank you very much for
yes,
coming.
thank you for
I mean,
attending.
That definitely accomplished a lot.
Oh, policy.
Thank you.
That's not what I thought he said.
Josh, thank you.
Thank you, see you guys.
So very simply, it was just a policy recommendation to determine that we're gonna keep a certain number in the undesignated fund.
So I was reading your proposal. Were you proposing, for instance, for this year, to keep a minimum of 1.6 million? Was part of your proposal that if we're above that, we put it towards that year's operating
Yes.
budget?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the whole purpose of it. Most towns have a policy for that, from what I can tell. Gray has one, Pownell has one. And it's basically, they're a little bit different and the way they get to the numbers a little bit different. But
So my question would be two things. One, in reference to the article that you sent about the undesignated fund balance being able to help weather the peaks and valleys, are you proposing that perhaps whatever amount or percentage we would come to? Because if we were trying to do that, there may be some years if we're forecasting that would require a higher number to be able to absorb a peak versus another year where there would be a valley. Do you see what I'm saying? And if we always
but
just
they're pretty
come,
consistent year after year. I mean, it grows each year.
yeah.
I like your idea. I was thinking of maybe making it a little bit higher though, so that you do have a little bit extra padding in the undesignated fund. So if you get a scare year,
Or somebody overspent.
then you might have a little bit extra money in
Or we
there
need
that
a new
you
plan.
could put towards a bad year. And my concern is that 2 months, again, is based on 2-year-old data. So,
No, it's based on current budget.
But it's not too, it's $10 million.
It's based on the
whatever.
2023 budget
okay,
and expenses, what is
okay.
expected.
Okay.
Right, but the expenses, I see, okay.
Yeah.
There's a couple ways to do it. I just decided that it's not gonna happen with the select board. So I'm just gonna wait.
Yes,
that's
don't
fine.
worry.
I like your
You're at
idea
home.
though, so when you present it, give me a call and I'll be happy to stand beside you. So,
Anything else come before this committee this evening? So that's it. So just a reminder that I hope you'll all come and attend town meeting. Even though we all typically sit together at town meeting, you are not prevented and in fact encouraged to speak up as a resident. So if there's something that, the budget committee may have voted one direction, but you really have a different thought, you are welcome to speak, on your own behalf. I wouldn't want to try to mute that at all. But I definitely encourage you to come and, let people see that come sit with the budget committee and let people see that you were part of this process.
And the whole to throw spitballs at.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I make motion, we adjourn.
Is there a second? All those in favor? Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so
Thanks
I
for your
just wanna
service
show
to
you
the town.
this. I was gonna print this off.